Dort for the win. It's good!
Pokuševski takes flight
as SGA plays through the contact, banks it in on the foul.
What is up, Thunder fans, and welcome to the Uncontested Post-Game Podcast. We are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and the official podcast of SI Thunder. I'm your host for tonight, Taylor Peterson. You can find me on Twitter at Taylor_P15, and you can find us at The Uncontested on just about all socials, including Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, even TikTok. When I do this intro for all my post games, I always promise more content on TikTok and YouTube. But, you know, I was doing better there for a while. Then I had my firstborn, and the content has not been flowing from those two avenues outside of obviously our live streams that are on YouTube. So we appreciate all of you tuning into YouTube, first and foremost. Be sure to subscribe and be able to tune in anytime we go live, get notified anytime we go live. However, I promise, now that we're starting to settle back in to not a normal, but like a new normal routine around the Peterson household, I will try and be more active on YouTube and TikTok and start to pump out some more content, especially as we get closer and closer to the off season. We start drafting. I wish we were drafting. That'd be kind of fun. As we start looking into draft prospects and doing a little more, putting out a little more content when it comes to those things. So I promise I'll be a little more active on those social medias. The Thunder, let's just get right to it. The Thunder get a huge win and just a very competitive game against two of just the best teams in the league with huge playoff implications no, just kidding. April Fools. It is April 1st tonight. It was not a good game, but it was great in terms of outcome for the Thunder. The Thunder end up winning the Battle of the Tank. I think actually in my description for this live stream that StreamYard requires me to put in, I said that the Thunder lost the battle but win the war because they end up losing to the Pistons 110 to 101. But obviously that is a pretty huge loss for the Thunder in terms of their lottery odds. They're not quite tied now for third best odds like I originally tweeted out, just a spur of the moment at the end of the game. However, they are now tied with Detroit in the win column, which is really big. So essentially they are, I actually have it pulled it up here. So they're 0.5 games back from Detroit, or it depends on how you look at that. But essentially, Detroit is only up 0.5 games in terms of third best lottery odds for OKC. So that was big. A lot to kind of dive into in that regard. Not a whole lot to dive into in terms of the game. If you guys listen to a lot of my post games in the past, I like to tend to break games down into positives and negatives, or even just overall themes. I'll get into some of the things from tonight, but I think a lot tonight we're going to focus on, I got a lot of really good Twitter questions. I have some draft thoughts, obviously the draft implications from tonight's game. So maybe not so much the play from tonight's game, although we will cover that a bit. But I say all of that. I tweeted out asking for questions, kind of like the old days before we went live for these post-game podcasts. So I see actually a pretty decent handful of you all tuning in live, which I greatly appreciate here on a Friday night after what was not the most fun game, but again, a desired outcome. So all of you tuning in live, be sure to drop questions in the chat, and I will be sure to address those at the same time as well. See my guy Joseph Dieterman already dropping some comments in here, so keep them coming, and I will get those addressed. So like I said, 110 to 101 loss. Obviously a big loss for the Thunder, but a big loss for the Thunder. A good for their draft lottery implications. That was an important L to have. But just getting into kind of some pregame notes here, how that came about. The game wasn't really as close as it seems. Fourth quarter, the Thunder kind of made a comeback there. We'll dive into that some. But before the game, Tre Mann rolled out pretty early this go around. If you guys have been following along, you know that Tre Mann has been out the past couple of games with a hamstring strain that the Thunder have called it. But it's been pretty much almost like a game time decision, usually announced around Dignault's media availability about 2 hours before the game, typically when he goes live with the media. And tonight, or today, I should say, it was announced quite a bit earlier, even before Dignault addressed the media. And so Trey Mann did not play tonight, which, again, you can take that how you want. I think there is a real hamstring injury probably bugging him, but could he maybe play, if this were a different season? Probably, but it's not worth risking at this point of the season. We've talked a little bit about that over the past couple of weeks, on our post games and even our group podcast. Like, even if the Thunder weren't quote unquote tanking at this point of the season, but they just found themselves in this position because, let's just say, the West is so stacked and, the Thunder are so young, and here we are, we don't really have a shot at the playoffs. It doesn't make sense playing guys like Teo, who are a little banged up right now, and forcing that when you want them 100, 110% heading into next season. So all that to say, Teo did not play tonight, was ruled out pretty early, and then closer to tip off, probably around the time that Dignault did go live, or did go into his availability with the media, although I don't remember exactly when this was announced, but it was announced that Poku was ruled out due to flu-like symptoms. And this has actually been going around the team. If you added the last week or so, last week and a half, if you guys remember, before Baisley got injured here, again, about a week and a half ago, he was questionable with flu-like symptoms. And then Olivier Sar also was out one game with flu-like symptoms. So, again, like the Detroit Pistons, I understand we really wanted to get this L, help lottery odds, but I promise you, especially the way that they've been using Poku recently, kind of using him as a facilitator in a new role that he's not really accustomed to. I don't think this was really a tank move. I would put a lot of money down that Poku's actually sick. And so with Poku being out, that left the Thunder with only 7 available players. Well, Poku and Mann being out, that left the Thunder with only 7 available players. In fact, I saw John Hamm, some other Thunder media people tweeting out, talking about like how at first they were like, oh my gosh, the Thunder only have 7 players. What are they going to do? Well, what they did, and they announced this very quickly after Poku was ruled out, they were able to call up Jalen Horde from the OKC Blue on a 10-day hardship contract to give them the necessary 8 players to play the game, so that game didn't have to get rescheduled. If you all remember, Jalen Horde obviously played with the Blue all season this season. I think he got called up for like 1 game with the Thunder this season in December, but last season especially, he was kind of like I'm trying to think, not really Wiggins, that's not a good comparison, but maybe like the Olivier Sar. Right. Obviously, they play different positions, but Horde was given, that 2-way contract towards the end of the season to finish out the season with the Thunder. And we saw a lot of him down a similar stretch about this time last year with the Thunder. And so he gets to call up, again, somebody who's been in the OKC Thunder and Blue system for a long time. Kind of an easy plug and play guy. You don't have to teach them a whole lot. They know what they're doing. And that's kind of exactly what happened. We'll dive into Horde a little bit, but he had a pretty solid showing overall, especially for kind of getting, thrown into a role with the Thunder tonight, almost out of nowhere, probably for him. Although I haven't seen any post game about him. But he actually ends up starting tonight, and we're going to get into that as well. But I mentioned Trey Mann. I do think it's a real injury. I think he could have played in the right circumstances. Kind of on that point, my little brother Hayden, you guys probably heard me talk about him on the podcast before. He's been on the podcast before for some of you longtime listeners. Him, my mom, my dad, his girlfriend actually got to go to the game tonight. Not the best game to go to necessarily, but it was kind of cool. Hayden actually got to go down courtside, or I guess my family got to go down courtside before the game, get to watch the team warm up a little bit, got to kind of talk to some people. And Hayden took it was a picture and then a little bit of video of Giddey warming up, and then a picture of him and Shea kind of dapping up, which is really cool. But all of that to say, Giddey looks like he's moving well. I think he could fall in a similar category as Trey Mann, to where, like, yes, if this were 3 seasons from now, 4 seasons from now, and the Thunder are fighting for a playoff position versus a play-in position, for example, maybe you play Josh Giddey and Trey Mann in a close game against a team in a similar position. But that's not the case this season. That's not the case right now. It does not make sense to play them. I only mention that because it's great to hear and to see physically that Giddey is moving well, and hopefully, assuming no setbacks, that he's going to be 110% heading into the offseason, being able to improve on himself, his physically, and then also his game in the offseason, then heading into we'll see if he plays Summer League. I might not, but especially heading into this next season. So that was good to hear, and kind of cool to see Hayden get to do that. But I mentioned the starters. The Thunder start Teo, Jalen Horde, Aaron Wiggins, Vit Krejci, and I put Maladone here again, but they started Roby. And obviously Waters, Sar, and JRE are the 3 available players off the bench. Pretty cool French connection. Speaking of some of those players, Sar mentioned pregame, getting to play with Jalen Horde and Teo Maladone since they were about 14 or 15, which is really cool that they're all 3 at least in the same organization, right? Especially with 2 of those players, 2 of those other players, Horde and Teo. Even if Teo's been with the Thunder essentially the entire season on the roster, he still was called down. I hate saying called down. He was assigned to the Blue for a large portion of this season just to get him more reps, which paid dividends, right? But it is cool that him, Horde, and Sar all got to play together again since they have been playing together back home for so long. And then it's not just that connection either, but as you guys might remember, Killian Hayes, who was drafted pretty high overall from Detroit Pistons here 2-3 seasons ago now. I can't remember which draft that was. Pretty recent. The point guard for the Detroit Pistons, and his post-game availability, he mentioned playing with Teo, or he was asked about Teo and playing against him. And, he mentioned it was a lot of fun. He loves playing against him because it's competitive, but they've been playing with each other since they were really young back home in France as well. So that's a really cool kind of French connection to mention. And then, so speaking of starters and the Pistons, look, like I mentioned guys, again, like Trey Mann, like Giddey. Obviously, we haven't gotten a full update on Kenrich Williams, but just because the Thunder, ruled these players out with an injury, Detroit took a different approach, which I kind of want to mention here, which is very similar to an approach that the Orlando Magic took here when the Thunder played them last week at a home game for OKC. They go ahead and start some of their better players. Obviously Jeremy Grant has been rolled out for the season, but the Pistons start Saddiq Bey, Isaiah Livers, again, kind of a guy thrown in there, but he's gotten some burn this season. Isaiah Stewart, Cade Cunningham being the big one, and like I mentioned, Killian Hayes. However, you look at their minutes. Killian Hayes got 40 minutes. Isaiah Livers got 42, but the other 3 guys that you probably really recognize those names, Saddiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham had 7 minutes, Isaiah Stewart 6, and Saddiq Bey 6. Meanwhile, off the bench, some guy named Jay Pickett. I don't know who that is. 39 minutes. Frank Jackson, OKC legend Frank Jackson. Yes, if you go to the Uncontested Twitter account, you will see me pulling up old tweets of myself from preseason when Frank Jackson was with OKC, and I was so upset that they cut him 32 minutes. Saban Lee, right? Yeah, that's right. I thought I remember that correctly. 34 minutes off the bench. And some guy named Braxton Key. Don't know who that is. The only reason I recognize that name is because I heard it I don't think he's a rookie. He is a rookie this season. So earlier this season, I heard that name, and it was funny because a co-host of the podcast, Nick, and I went to high school with another kid named Braxton Key. So all of that to say, a common theme I'm seeing with some of these tanking teams that aren't OKC, trying to be a little more sly maybe with the tanking, instead of assigning an injury to a player, like say a Kenrich Williams or maybe even a Trey Mann. I'll go ahead and go there. They go ahead and start their players like Cade Cunningham, Isaiah Stewart, Saddiq Bey, but they only play in the first 6 minutes of the game, and then they pull them, they don't play again, right? And we saw that with the Orlando Magic last week, when they played their stars the first half and then pulled them at halftime, and they didn't see some of them saw the floor in the third quarter, not very much, and then the entire bench played the rest of the way in the fourth quarter for Orlando to pull out that L, aka that W. So all of that to say, these other teams are doing it too, right? And it's just I think it's easier. I was explaining this to a coworker. It's a little easier earlier this week. It's a little easier to go after the Thunder. There's the whole Seattle thing, right? They have the Seattle target on their back for quote unquote stealing the team from Seattle. There's been national media who have it out for them because of that. Always have, always will. OKC found early success, right? There's people who don't like that. And, they're a small market team who shouldn't have had that success early on. And here they are. And, now they're down here. And then also Presti's doing something so unconventional. We've talked about this as well on the podcast, where he has all these different draft picks, right? Just this plethora of draft picks, and he's getting all this praise from people within the NBA. And so then you have some in the media who don't like that very much. You're like, well, what has he done with it, right? And like, why is he getting all this praise when my team's not? Whole lot to go into that. We can go down that rabbit hole another time, another day. However, I bring all that up to say that what the Pistons are doing, what Orlando is doing, is no different. They might just be doing it a little more sly, a little more, not secretive necessarily, but it's not quite as loud, maybe, but still, right? And that's why this game was so important for OKC to be able to almost tie the Pistons in the third best lottery odds. Like I said, they're a half game back. So, just really quick before we transition here, I'm seeing a lot more comments in the chat. Really appreciate you all. I'm going to get into all those here soon, so keep them coming. But we're going to go ahead and transition here into some of the themes overall from tonight's game, specifically individual players, before we get into some bigger overall themes and kind of transition out of this game. So some highlights for OKC, especially. We have, like I said, Jalen Horde, a.k.a. Jalen Board. Am I right? I tweeted that out. Ba-boom. Right. 11 points and 20 rebounds. 20 rebounds for Jalen Horde set a Thunder season record for the most rebounds of a Thunder player this season. The previous one being Josh Giddey with 18. So that says a lot of things about this team in general, right? No true big, like we've talked a lot about. And we've talked about how important it will be moving forward. Obviously, we like to see floor spacers in terms of three-point shooters to surround guys like Josh Giddey, Trey Mann, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But it's also important to have vertical spacing, and that means a lob threat. And typically, those guys are also very good rebounders. So this is almost by design this season, right? As well as kind of a poor three-point shooting team as a whole. But that is one such a need that the Thunder can address in the draft or even in trade in these upcoming seasons as they start to transition back into contention again. And I think Jalen Horde coming in again, just we'll talk about Jalen, but just him coming in and getting 20 boards and that being a season record, I think says a lot. However, Jalen is a hustler. We saw this a couple seasons ago. I feel like he got some burn in the bubble, if I remember correctly, with that CP3 Shea Shooter team. And then obviously, like I mentioned, he got a lot of burn about this time last season when he was called up on a two-way and got quite a bit of burn with OKC. And then we watched him in the blue. We watched him in Summer League the past couple of seasons. The guy just goes out there and hustle. He can't really score the ball very well. For example, he was 5 of 9 from the floor tonight. It's good, but 1 of 3 from the floor overall. I'm not even going to pull up his overall stats with the Thunder versus with the Blue because it's just not worth it. But he's a guy who hustles really hard, does the right things on the defensive end, does the right things offensively. He's willing to go and get those boards. He's willing to dive on the floor, try and get steals, right? And I think that's why the Thunder like him and are willing to reward him. Again, just kind of a guy that you can plug and play in a situation like this, and he will do the things that he does. For example, 20 rebounds at essentially the small forward, power forward position, whatever you want to call it, with this lineup that the Thunder started. Not a whole lot to say about Jalen. I don't think this means anything at all long term, other than just to kind of show him recognition for what he was able to do tonight, and the fact that he did set a season high in rebounds for this team with 20 rebounds because he's going out there and trying his hardest and had a solid showing overall. So Jalen deserves a little bit of recognition there. Guys like Aaron Wiggins, Veet, those were two guys I was kind of hoping to see a little bit more of. Now, if they had a little bit bigger of a role with guys like Poku out, guys with Trey Mann out, we've seen Veet had a really good stretch here, especially from the three-point line. We talk a lot about his offensive spacing off ball, right? Some of the things that he's been doing. Unfortunately, tonight, when he was kind of thrust into more of a ball handler role alongside Teo Maledon, only 7 points on 2 of 8 shooting. So just not the best night from Veet. And that's in 40 minutes as well. So, I was hoping to see a little more from him, especially since we've seen some flashes over these past couple of weeks from Veet. But regardless, not a whole lot from him. Same for Aaron Wiggins. Obviously, we're pretty high on Aaron as a fan base, as a podcast here at The Uncontested, in terms of just him being drafted where he was, coming up on this two-way, then getting converted because of his two-way play, right? And we saw him here, what was it, last week, where he had like a career-high 28 points or whatever, alongside, I'm going to say, but I can't remember who it was, Roby. It was the game where it went to overtime against the Blazers. But tonight, only 7 points on 3 of 10 shooting, so not a huge night from Wiggins as well. However, there were 2 other guys that really stepped up on the offensive end of the floor that kept this one interesting, at least. One of those was Teo Maledon, And if you watch the first 3 quarters of the game and then you stopped, you would think I was absolutely crazy. Because quite honestly, I had to do a little bit of a double take when I looked at his stats after the game, because he didn't do a whole lot until the second half. He got it going some in the third quarter, right? But it was the fourth quarter when, I kind of hate to say this, but the Pistons were playing the same 5 players that they had played the entire second half. Everybody's kind of winding down. That's when Teo kind of took over from a scoring standpoint, and ended up with 28 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 10 of 22 from the floor, 3 of 8 from 3. Again, just kind of the opportunity presented itself for Teo. And so you saw those shot attempts go up. Therefore, those points go up. Not a whole lot of defense on the other end of the floor. That's not to just completely discredit Teo and what he's done over the past couple of weeks either. But again, Teo just seems like one of those players, we've talked a lot about it on this podcast, where he has had great moments with the Thunder when he's thrust into these kind of opportunities. But when he's with the team, with a full healthy team, and when he's playing against other competitive, fully healthy teams, he just doesn't quite rise to the occasion. He seems to be a player who kind of gets in his own head at times, and even then, like, his highest of highs aren't even all that high. He's just one of those safe players. But I was kind of having this conversation with some other. Just realized, okay, so when I plugged my mic back in, it was muted. Sorry about all of that for those of you who were on the live stream. I'll go in post live stream, and we'll be sure to cut that out. So yeah, I accidentally had my arm on the cord. It plugged the cord to my mic. My sound stopped. I plugged my cord back in, started talking again, and it had me muted because my mic was unplugged. So I apologize about that. I was talking about Teo. I believe what I was saying about Teo. Yes, he had a good opportunity, had a great stat line tonight, 28 points, really kind of took over there in the fourth when the opportunity presented itself. But the thing with Teo, I was talking about talking about this with some friends on Thunder Twitter, who aren't part of the podcast. They were just asking me like, hey, do you think Teo is going to be an NBA player long term? And I think what we've seen from Teo in this recent stretch is that he can be, right? But I think of a guy, for example, kind of like, Frank Jackson for the Pistons tonight. A guy I was really high on when he was playing with the Thunder in preseason here a couple seasons ago. He gets cut. I was kind of upset, not upset, but it's like, man, I kind of wanted to see what he could do. Like, I thought maybe he could crack the rotation. He stuck around with the Pistons. He's gotten some burn over the past couple of seasons here and there and spot minutes, and he's contributed at times. But when it comes down to it, he's not going to crack a 9-man rotation for a competitive team. And I think Teo could fall in a similar category. Maybe he does, right? Maybe he can crack that rotation, but I don't think you're ever going to see him be a regular off the bench for a playoff contender. It's kind of where I'm at with Teo. I don't mean for that to sound harsh, Teo seems like a really great guy, an extremely hard worker, like we continue to hear. I think that's why he's continued to be rewarded with these opportunities, because he shows up day in, day out and does the right things. And that's really hard to do, especially when you're not always in the regular rotation. But like we've seen him with a healthy Thunder team. We've seen him struggle in that regard against like healthy competitive teams that Thunder play against when everybody's fully healthy and really plugged in. So because of all those things, I don't see Teo being a long-term rotation piece or a piece for this Thunder team. But it's worth mentioning Teo, A, because he was the highest scorer for tonight for the Thunder, and also because I think he's had a solid stretch. So sorry again there for cutting out there. But I think what I was getting into before I realized I was muted, there's one other Thunder player I wanted to mention on the stat sheet. Before I do, just quickly, Olivier Sar, I mentioned him earlier in the podcast, 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists on 4-7 shooting. Not a huge night from him, not a ton of opportunity. And JRE, 5 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists in only 10 minutes because, first of all, before the game, I believe Daignault mentioned that he was going to cap his minute restriction at 20 minutes, just trying to get him back in the swing of things and watch that foot. However, that left foot flared back up again tonight. He was questionable to return per Thunder PR due to soreness in that left foot. And if you guys remember, that was the left foot that he had a procedure on earlier in the season that has kept him out for a while, up until here last week, right? So that was a little concerning to hear that was flaring up on him again until the post-game availability when Daignault mentioned, like, look, no big deal. He probably could have come back in. But I think the quote and the phrase that Daignault used was playing with fire. And that, you don't really want to mess with that at this point of the season. Kind of like I mentioned with some of these other guys, like Trey Mann, Josh Giddey. Why throw them back in there at this point of the season? Get them 110% healthy so you can hit the ground running heading into this next season. Kind of a similar situation, it sounds like, for JRE. With that being said, I would not be surprised if we don't see JRE the rest of the season due to that flaring up a little bit on him when he's getting a little more playing time, which means, one, do they activate Trey Mann again? Two, do they activate Trey Mann and or Kenrich Williams, who haven't really gotten an update on, but just don't play them? Kind of like I mentioned with teams like the Detroit Pistons and the Orlando Magic, starting their starters, but only playing them 5 or 6 minutes. Or 3, and I think most likely, you see another 10-day exception, and you see a guy like, who's the kid? Ramsey from, I think it was Ramsey. I don't remember. There's a kid on the Blue right now that they picked, not even a kid. He's a little older. A guy on the Blue that they picked up, the Blue picked up here mid-season in a trade, who used to play for Texas Tech. And I want to say Ramsey, but I could be getting him confused. Regardless, he's played really well for the Blue. He's been out recently, maybe due to some injury, but if he's healthy, that is a candidate, for example, who could come up and play with the Thunder on a 10-day. So I think that would be an option there as well. But all that to say, finally, the guy I really want to talk about here is Lindy Waters III. Another game for him where he had 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists. Again, talk about a guy who's just kind of doing a little bit of everything when given the opportunity. But that shooting continues to really impress. Only 4 of 10 from 3. Not super efficient, but again, he shot the ball from 3 10 times, which is awesome. And it's 6-12 from the floor overall. It's impressive to see him adapt when some of these, defenses, again, I have to put that kind of in quotations based off the teams that they've been playing, as some of the guys have been throwing out at him. But regardless, to be able to adapt his game and recognize that teams are going to be trying to push him off the 3-point line and guard him differently because he's been so, he's proven that he's a great 3-point shooter. And being able to adapt his game, being able to score around the rim is really impressive. Got a lot of questions about Lindy, so I'll kind of save maybe more of a deep dive analysis on him for those questions. But I wanted to mention him here when it comes to the highlights of the game as well, because I thought Lindy had another solid game. Only 22 minutes from him tonight, that would be the second lowest on the team behind JRE, who was hurt. That is not because Lindy wasn't playing well. I think that honestly is because of how high Daignault views him. Maybe a piece, maybe we'll get into that not long term, but at least into next season. And also just because Lindy's got a ton of burn recently. So you can kind of give some of these other guys a little more burn, like a Jalen Horde, for example. I beat Krejci a little more burn since Lindy's gotten so much and kind of let him rest. Now on the other side of the ball, just the two guys, like I said, Killian Hayes had 26 points, 12-25 shooting. Nice to see him have a good game. even if it was against G League opponents. And like Frankie smokes 26 points, 7 to 16 from the floor. So all that to say, it's not even worth going into team stats. Not a ton to break down there, but there were some high points for the Thunder for this game. Now, I'm going to get into some Twitter questions and chat questions, which consists of some of these players long-term with the Thunder, some draft questions. I think I mentioned that. Then I want to do some lotto sims, and then maybe talk about some of the players that OKC could find themselves picking in those situations. But before I do that, let's do a quick ad read and hear from some of our sponsors, which include ourselves here at the Uncontested. Then we'll jump back into things.
What's up, Thunder fans? This is Jacob from the Uncontested podcast, and I'm here to let you know that we have fully redesigned our merch store to get you the best Thunder swag available. Just visit cottonbureau.com and search the Uncontested podcast to find all of our new designs. That's cottonbureau.com and search the Uncontested podcast to find new drops like Josh Giddey's Wizard of Oz or an ode to the Trey Man Step Back. We've also got all the classics like Dortal Combat, Liu Tang Clan, and everyone's favorite MVP, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The best part? You can get any design and the style of apparel you want. So if you're gearing up for the summer and want a tank top, needing a hoodie for the winter in Australia, or you're wanting a Pokemon onesie for your baby, we've got you covered. Make sure to go to cottonbureau.com and search the Uncontested podcast to get your new Thunder gear today.
All right, so we are back. And first, I want to dive into some Twitter questions because I got some really good ones tonight. And then I'm going to go through all of your guys' chat questions. We'll do a couple rolls on Tankathon, Sims on Tankathon, and then we'll get it off here. So, Nedley Kelly, friend of the podcast, been sending some really good stuff into us recently. We appreciate it. Nedley asks, the Thunder are at the bottom because they pulled levers. If they pulled 0 levers this year, they played every player like it was a final series. So essentially they were just competitive, I think is what he's getting at, and we're trying to make a play-in or a playoff game. How many more wins did the Thunder get this year? And where do they sit on the ladder with 0 levers pulled? He says, SGA going for 50 on Portland, using that as an example. So the Thunder are currently 22 and 25. I think you assume that they play everybody that is healthy. I think, Dort maybe plays through some of that shoulder injury, but gets the procedure in the offseason, right? But he's still banged up and probably not 110%. Giddey is battling the hip soreness. He's still playing, but it's 110%. You can probably assume the same from Trey, but we saw the level he was playing at. So we can probably assume that he would be close to 100% if he were playing. We saw him take those leaps. Now, one thing to take into consideration there, Nedley, is like if you have Trey Man, for example, yes, he will show improvement, I would think, just because of the player he is. We'll see some flashes of this, but will we see what he was doing here 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago on a regular basis like we were when he's not given the opportunity because you have guys like Kenrich Williams, for example, still playing? And I'm not sure you do. So you kind of have to take that away from some of this. You can't say like, Trey Man's doing what he's doing, Kenrich is healthy, Lou Dort's healthy, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of have to take all those things into consideration. But even then, with all that being said, I think the Thunder are definitely flirting with 30 wins. So that's another 8 wins from what they have now. If we go ahead and pull up the standings for the Western Conference, which I probably should already have pulled up, that would put them around... that's the East. 30 wins would put them right there with the Lakers at 11. Right there at 10 with 32 for the Spurs. I think you could probably, again, like there is, especially if Shai takes the leap that he did once he got healthy, post All-Star, like there's a lot of different things. Maybe that does result in another 2 or 3 wins. All that to say, long answer short, I think they're competing with teams like the Lakers and the Spurs, the Pelicans for that last playoff spot, play-in spot. That's where I would have them this season. I think we could probably assume that if they do go not all in, but they aren't pulling so many levers. I like the way you put that. If they aren't pulling so many levers this coming season, and they get a solid draft pick this season, they will probably find themselves in a similar situation to that of which I just described. That might seem low to some of you, but again, I think you have to take into consideration Thunder are still going to roster explore a bit. They're still going to try and develop young talent, and because of that, I don't see them being a full-on play-in or playoff team next season. I see them kind of flirting in that same range. Like I said, that you see a team like the Spurs. I think that's a really good comparison for where we could potentially see OKC next season. And then Nedley asks as well, Sar, Maladone, Horde all played for OKC. They all played together in high school in France. I mentioned that earlier in the pod. Have there been in American high school 3 kids on the same NBA court at the same time for the same team before? That is a really good question that I'm just now, like, I'm going off the dome here, just reading this. So I haven't done the research. I would like to I would assume not, just because that would be really low odds for that to happen. But that's interesting. Something to look into. If any of y'all do, be sure to tag us at the _contested and Nedley at Kelly, KELLY _NEDLEY, because that's a really good question. Now, on to the next one. Our friend of the podcast, Ty Windish. He is the co-host. If you guys have heard that name before, it's because he's been on this podcast when we've done did our season preview and then our bubble preview here a couple seasons ago for the Milwaukee Bucks. He is part of the Blue Wire family, actually works for Blue Wire now, which is really, really awesome. And Ty, Rohan, and they now have they're the co-host of the Eurostep podcast, Gyro, however you say it, GYRO. Really, really fun, punny play on the title there. But they actually have their own podcast network now. They brought in another Bucks podcast. All that to say, Ty has been reaching out to us a little bit recently about Lindy Waters. He is curious about Lindy. He is one of the ones I was referring to when I talked a little bit about Lindy earlier in the podcast. He says, how do you really see him fitting in going forward? So here's the thing. Like, if we're just talking about him fitting in, like Ty, I think he fits in perfect, right? He is exactly what this Thunder team needs, and a floor spacing 3-and-D type of player, right? Who can knock down threes consistently from outside, causes the defense causes defenders to gravitate towards him, which therefore opens up the lane for players like Giddey, SGA, Trey Mann, others, even some of our bigs, right? However, can he hold up on the defensive side of the ball when he, like I mentioned, you're playing in a regular rotation? Like, if you guys think like Roby's been playing well, right? But you think about, pre-All-Star break, he couldn't even crack the rotation in a healthy Thunder team, because I think a large part of that was due to the defense and how much Daigneault values that. Now, you watch him on the defensive end of the floor and you see him hustling, making the right plays, but he's going to have to put on some size in that regard and some strength in that regard in the offseason. Regardless, I speaking of Lindy, I mentioned this if you all go back when they signed him to that 2-way here a month and a half, 2 months ago. I did not view I viewed it more as one of those like reward contracts, kind of like we saw with Jalen Horde last season, right? Where they bring him up because he's a player who's been doing the right things within the system for the Blue. He gets a little burn with the Thunder while they're going through this rebuild, and they're sitting guys, and the guys are injured. It's almost a reward. And he's a local kid, right? Really cool story. I kind of thought that was all it was, especially because that first 2 weeks of his time with OKC, he was only thrown in for like 3 seconds at a time at the end of a quarter is when Daigneault would put him in. But that has not been the case. We've seen him really flourish with more time, especially shooting from outside. So I actually tweeted about that tonight. I think he's really impressed me. He's proven me wrong, especially because we knew he was a good 3-point shooter. For example, he played for OSU, so I got to see him some because of that. I'm in OKC now. I'm originally from Tulsa. I'm a TU, University of Tulsa alumni, so I actually saw Lindy in person quite a few seasons playing against my Hurricanes in some non-conference games that they had scheduled. Never thought of him as a NBA player, right? But he has proven me wrong here in the past month or so. He continues to impress, and like I mentioned, more so because he's doing stuff outside of shooting 3-pointers. Like I mentioned, he's able to drive to the rim some. And so all that to say, The Thunder signed him to a 2-year two-way, right, which is like a new legal thing that the NBA started allowing here, I think, last season. I think he kind of he sticks around with the team on that two-way next season. They fit him in as much as they can. We might not see him a lot beginning the first half of next season, but I think if he continues to put the work in, he will get some burn. They'll throw him in at times. If he continues to impress, he can kind of carve himself a role out here, which will be interesting to watch. Again, I was very wrong with this like a month ago. So a lot can change between now and then, especially with drafts and trades and everything else. All that to say, I'm more excited about Lindy than I thought I would be. And that's maybe one of the few high points outside of lottery odds here at this point of the season. Now, I'll try and go through the rest of these pretty quick. Jacob, our co-host, Jacob Niffen, Chet, Jabari, Paulo. Which of these players' career would be better if they end up in OKC versus anywhere else? That's a really, really good question. And this is tough because I think all three of those players, I think they're all going to be great players. They all have incredible potential, but with all three of them, I think fit is going to play a very important role to help them reach their ultimate ceilings, which I think for all three of them is at least all-star, if not in some cases superstar, right? In terms of Chet and Paulo, at least. But I think the biggest one here, and the most obvious, is Chet. Just based off that physical stature, he's really going to have to bulk up. He's going to have to find his role in the NBA. He's never going to be a huge guy, but he is going to be playing power. He's going to have to play power forward and center minutes, right? And be able to bang down low with some of those guys if he's going to be successful in the NBA. We've seen his competitiveness, his will to battle with some of those guys as early as AAU ball, right? We've seen his elite shot blocking ability. So if he can gain some strength and learn how to hold his own, as well as be able to kind of incorporate some post moves on the offensive end of the floor, I think that's going to be huge for him. Also, I think another example of a player who goes to an elite, well-known historical college in Gonzaga, and his offensive role is limited. If you go back and watch a lot of Chet's tape, I say tape, for us these days, it's really a lot of highlights. Going back to YouTube, if you have a Synergy account, maybe you can go back and watch some actual tape. But you go back and look at his high school, middle school, he's handling the ball. He's going coast to coast. He's knocking down a transition off the dribble threes. I think he's going to be able to utilize a lot more of that in the NBA, but only if he gets drafted to the right team. And I think he's going to be able to showcase all those things with OKC, to Jacob's question. So to answer that question, I'm going Chet on that one. But I think those other two, fit's going to be important for them as well long term. Michael Glenn actually responded to that. I like to engineer. That's kind of cool. That was his handle. He says Chet for sure needs time, and OKC can give him that. I think that's pretty spot on, Michael. Zombie Tom, that's a fun one. Zombie Tom replies to us and says, Waters, Sar, Maladone, Horde, Krejci. Will any of them be in the NBA in 3 years? And who has a 50-50 chance? Unlikely but possible, and not a chance. Okay, so that's kind of, you followed up with another question there, but I think those can kind of be combined into one. I've alluded to this, so I'll try and answer earlier in the podcast. So I'll try and answer this a little more quickly. I would say of that list, and this might be disrespectful to Maladone and some of the things that he's been doing, but you can find guards like that who can contribute at that level. You can't find 3-and-D players quite as much. That's why, that wing position is so coveted in the NBA these days, and the way and style that these teams are playing in. Because of that, I'm going Waters and Krejci based on what they have shown. I know Krejci is listed as a point guard. I know that he can play point guard. And it's probably for those, but he has the size of a wing, I think, especially if he can bulk up and get a little stronger. Because of that, I'm probably going Krejci as the most likely, which I guess in this case, to answer your second question, would be the 50-50 chance. Waters as the unlikely but possible, although I think he might be closer to the 50-50, and Krejci might be just like a bit above that, right? But again, to your question, maybe Krejci would be that next category. And then not a chancers, I would say Sar and Horde would be the two there. And to use your unlikely but possible category, I would go ahead and throw Maladone in there. And then final one on Twitter, Rob. Rob asked, was Aaron Wiggins' primary ball handling minutes as fun for you as it was for me? Rob, I loved it. You were tweeting along with us when it happened, when I tweeted out about it, but I can't say it was all that fun. But I do love OKC putting him in that position, allowing him to expand his game. I think that's going to help him, like we've seen flashes when, again, I keep mentioning and referring to this, but like he was one of those players getting some burn against fully healthy teams. When the fully healthy Thunder were playing together, he was getting burned, right? And we saw him. Some of the things that stood out the most to us was how he was comfortable putting the ball on the floor and creating for himself in the mid-range as well as driving to the rim. And I think what he was doing tonight, getting to handle the ball some, we aren't going to see that a lot for him, but that's going to help expand his game, therefore expand his role with the Thunder. I think it was a good thing. Now, let's go ahead and scroll through the chat here. You all had some good questions. I'll pick some good ones. Joseph Dieterman, speaking of Lindy, he said, like the Lindy, definitely a third guy off the bench. Okay, third guy off the bench. That would certainly be that 8-man, 9-man rotation and a playoff rotation. I hope he can get there. I do. Xander said that he's missed about a week of NBA Thunder basketball. Where does this loss put us in the reverse standings? Well, Xander, I mentioned this at the top of the podcast, but the Thunder are at 22-55. Detroit is at 22-56. So that at 3, Detroit is in terms of best lottery odds. So OKC is 0.5 games back from Detroit. And then Houston and Orlando are tied for the best overall lottery odds at 20-58. Detroit is 2 games back from them. We are 2.5 games back from Orlando and Houston. So basically, long story short, the rest of the season, we're going to be neck and neck. This next week or so, we're going to be neck and neck with Detroit for those third best odds. We can tie. If we tie, I'm pretty sure I have this correct. I've seen some people tweeting about this. Friend of the podcast, JD Brown, I'm pretty sure was tweeting about this earlier today. Thunder and Detroit would keep their lottery odds in terms of getting one of those top picks, but they would do a coin flip for the basically like the drop odds. How far can a team drop? So they might have the same odds if they both end tied at 3 best lottery odds for the best pick, or for lottery chances. But there'd be a coin flip to see which one of those teams could drop the furthest in those lottery odds. So it's kind of confusing. I didn't explain that super well. But to answer your question, Xander, they are very, very close for those third odds, which honestly I didn't really think was going to be possible. Eamon helped me out there, said Killian was drafted 2020, so that was 2 years ago. For some reason, I was thinking it could have been 3, but it was, 2. Time flies. Joseph Dieterman actually said Wiggins and Sar were on the same high school team, which is really cool. I didn't realize that. That Wiggins and Sar also played high school together, so that's another connection. Elijah said Horde and Victor Wembanyama have the same agent. Do you think Sam Presti is keeping Horde happy and hopes to one day? Yeah. Okay. So I tweeted this from the account here, however many weeks ago it was. It's not just Horde. There was another connection there as well to the Thunder. Look, Presti does like it. It's well documented. And then, we kind of knew this. We heard whispers about it. Relationships mean a lot to Presti, obviously. But then it was Ethan Strauss of formerly The Athletic. Now he has his own Substack. He actually did a full-on Substack about OKC and how they kind of utilize agents and relationships. And that is basically his whole point of that article was like, be sure to recognize some of those things, right? So like I was thinking, I think it was Olivier Sar. I thought it was surprising that he was given that two-way opportunity over a player like DJ Wilson, who had shown flashes in the past, who had played for the Raptors. And so that's kind of how I did some digging and found that they all shared the same agent. However, a lot of people pointed out like they're all France players. They all have the same French agent. So, I think it does mean some things, but like even let's say it was on purpose, that doesn't mean that Presti can just go out and sign Victor Wembanyama, right? Like he has to draft him and get lucky to move up and draft him or trade up and draft him. It just is I think it's just good to build those relationships as well. It's just kind of an additional plus, but it's something to keep an eye on for sure, considering that there's multiple players now who have that same agent, not just Horde, right? I mentioned Sar as well. Lev mentioned Teo had 28. Yep, that was my reaction as well. Eamon said, Jamius Ramsey. Yes, that's who I was referring to, Eamon, but I couldn't remember if that was the Texas Tech player who was with the Blue or if it was a different player. But yes, I was referring to Jamius. I'm pretty sure it is Ramsey who is playing with the Blue right now. He's been playing pretty well. And then the last two here, Eamon following up. How, in your mind, do we lose to Portland on Tuesday? Well, Eamon, we throw out the same stinking lineup we did today, and that is going to be our best bet, and it's going to be much closer than this Detroit game was tonight. But man, basically, I mean, we joke around and say, "Oh, the OKC Thunder, the OKC Blue played tonight," but typically there's a Trey Mann in there who played some with the Blue, but obviously he's a full Thunder player. Or Shea played with players of the Blue tonight, but tonight it was literally a Blue lineup through and through. That is how we lose to Portland on Tuesday, but Portland's doing the same exact thing. And like we saw with, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, like we saw with, Orlando, like we saw with Detroit tonight, like they're going to be sitting some of their better players. So it's going to be a grind. And let's see. Eamon says, on your question about lever pulling, did you include Muskie in your calculation? I didn't mention him, but yes, that's absolutely a lever. I just don't think it's, that one was just a given, and it was pulled very, very early. Okay, so you guys actually gave me a lot of questions on both platforms, more than I expected. So I really, really appreciate that because that helped fill time, and I think provided hopefully some good content. Hopefully I provided some good answers. So I said I was going to do some sims and we'd talk some draft prospects. Instead, since I've gone a little late here and then had those technical difficulties in between the live stream, I'm going to go ahead and just do 3 sims. We won't do prospects. We'll save that. We'll have a specific weekly podcast for that come off season, heading into the NBA draft lottery. So let's just go ahead and do a couple spins here on Tankathon, and we'll get out of here. First one, Indiana at 1, Houston 2, San Antonio 3. Oh, Knicks at 4, Orlando at 5, Detroit at 6, and OKC at 7. That is brutal. Not a good first one. Second, okay, Houston at 1, Portland at 2, Knicks at 3, OKC at 4. And then our final third, Atlanta, Washington, Orlando, Detroit, Houston, and OKC at 6. Man, not a good one. I had 3. Actually, I ended up doing 5, and all 5 were really good this morning. Not so good tonight, unfortunately. But there we have it. Again, a lot of fun prospects there, I think, to break down. And we'll be doing so here moving forward. So next up, I'm trying to pull up the Thunder schedule because there's not very many games. I was just thinking about that when I was mentioning that earlier in the podcast. Thunder play the Suns Sunday, April 3rd at OKC. They play the Blazers, like Eamon mentioned, on Tuesday. They play the Jazz April 6th. That's a back-to-back on Wednesday in Utah. That one will be tough. And then just a ridiculous game against the Lakers Friday, April 8th. And then a season finale yet again, 2 years straight, against the Los Angeles Clippers, who pulled off a crazy win tonight against the shorthanded Bucks, who basically set all their stars. But stinking Robert Covington went 41 points, and Amir Coffey went for 30 plus. So just wild stuff happening in Los Angeles in regards to both teams. So yeah, that's kind of the upcoming schedule for the Thunder. The Uncontested will have you all covered each step of the way. Thank you all for tuning in tonight, especially after a game like tonight. You guys, the listeners, are what makes this so fun for us. We really appreciate it. So stay tuned. We'll have you all covered, not just for the rest of the season, but the off season. A very fun, exciting off season for OKC as well. And until next time, Thunder up.